Heretics can at least cope with the fact that they, as is tradition at this point, only lost to the eventual third and first team. However, that is still coping because they did not win a single map and honestly looked quite clueless in general and completely clueless in Pearl. And at this point, I just have to say this team is just so frustratingly inconsistent and momentum based. Every single player, maybe except for Boo, but that's to be expected from an IGL, has huge individual upside. I've seen every one of them dominate the best teams in the world. But at the same time, they can all, maybe except for Rians, play like absolute shit in any given game. Part of this is probably the system. They do not have the same strategical rigidity that the other top Western teams have, but also lacking the mid-round creativity we've seen from the successful Pacific and China teams. They rely more on individual plays, initial aggression, risks and team fighting, and while that can work, they still are a very successful team since they have the score. It definitely does not foster consistency. They also seem to have a visibly very momentum-based team mood. I do not think there's any team in VCT where you can see whether they are winning or losing that much on the player counts. And all of this and of course their repeated finals losses made for a team that crumbled painfully easily recently. I think there's an argument to be made to run it back and rely on the team and the staff to figure things out, at least for the rest of the season. The players are still very young and esports often tends to dismiss players prematurely. On the other hand, Fnatic and PaperX last year both had struggling seasons after being traditionally very good, similar to what Heretics are dealing with right now, and they both find themselves at the top again after changing up the team dynamics and bringing in Crashies and Padman, who are not flashy but reliable and consistent role players with good utility and fundamentals. So it definitely is an option for Heretics to try and replicate that model. MMBR is the only team at the tournament that really embarrassed themselves. Their superstar Team Cornerstone duelist only dropped one more kill in the entire tournament than a tier 2 substitute dropped in a single map. MMBR makes up for more than half of the 7 worst rated players in the tournament and broke the record for the least rounds won in international. Literally, the only good thing about Made in Brazil was their non-Brazilian rookie Rono, who had great stats and honestly a very good tournament in pretty much every way, except for actually winning anything. This is great, and I'm certainly much higher on Verno now, but the sample size was very small and MMBR wasn't even playing any of the top teams, so I wouldn't read too much into Verno's career from that. The rest of the team performed so incredibly badly that you cannot just pinpoint a single issue here, but if I still had to pick one, it would just be the overall cohesion and team play. Yes, Aspas was really bad, and there are no excuses for that. However, the setup he got and the team's general synergy might have been even worse. Every single player, except for Verno, did not just do a little fragging, but also had very few assists and a terrible cast. The amount of times these players stood or walked around and then, well, just died without having any sort of impact is astonishing. Artisine finished an entire series, not just a single map, playing Breach and calling the strategy so he could perfectly integrate his util, and still had a total of 4 assists, including damage assists. Like, how do you even achieve that? MMBR is a long way to go if they want to actually compete internationally. Even making an international is a big step forwards for the franchise. We should probably focus more on that, but they have to improve quite a bit on pretty much every front if they want to be an actual contender there. Honestly, Team Liquid was just very unlucky. Having the IGL and arguably best player missing for the first game pretty much forced them to start in the lower bracket, and if you ignore that game, Team Liquid actually had a pretty impressive tournament. They absolutely destroyed MRBR and only lost a very close game to the eventual champions, PaperX. With the first game being a thing, this meant the tournament was over, but they did look great when Nats was playing, and even though they exited in the Swiss stage, Toronto definitely reinforced my belief in Liquid. Especially when you consider that there must have been an additional stress and difficulty planning their strats of the Visa debacle. I also think it was interesting how they incorporated Penny after Nat's return during a 6-man roster with Penny or Serial playing depending on role needs. However, to a certain extent, it also put a little bit more of a spotlight on the fact that Serial, at least this early in his career, is struggling to hold his own against the best teams in the world. I don't know whether Liquid is considering running a 6-player rotation in the future or making a permanent roster move, but I personally think they should give Serial some more time to improve. He only played in BCT for a few months and showed a lot of potential in my opinion. Even finished the tournament tied for the highest headshot percentage, which is obviously not the most important or telling statistic about a player's overall skill, but it does indicate a very strong mechanical foundation. Cyril might just need some more time to get accustomed to the pace, strategic complexity, and pressure of competing at the highest level. I have never seen a team that lives and dies by just swinging as much as BLG does. We haven't seen them internationally in 2024, but they honestly just feel the same as they did in 2023. Incredibly pacey and aggressive, great aimers and passionate risk takers. The quintessential and stereotypical Chinese Valorant team. And I'm not saying this hyper-aggressive and disrespectful style of Valorant can't work. They beat Liquid and took a map of Sentinels. Also, PepperX won the whole thing playing hyper-aggressive and at times borderline disrespectful Valorant. And this is probably the model BMG should follow if they want to seriously compete. Yes, a lot of pace, dry peeking and running through smokes works. Surprisingly often, but not always. If you start off every attack round swinging the same angle, you are gonna peek into an AWP or pre-fire. If you have the same rush pace every round, you are going to run into a trap play. If you disrespect every smoke, people are going to start holding them, and at some point you're not fast or clever anymore, you're just trolling. It took PaperX almost 5 years to learn that, and when they did, they won a trophy. So I'm curious to see how fast BLG learns. Well, my thoughts on XLG and RQ are so similar that I'm just going to say the one, since their situations just overlap so much, and the takeaway is pretty much the same. An honest nice try. You guys had a great regional run on the back of an unbelievable duelist. However, it is a lot harder to dominate internationally on the back of one outstanding player than this regionally, especially if that player has no experience on the international stage and nobody with that experience around him. In addition, the tournament format and draw was obviously quite bad for you. You ran into teams with great momentum and a good meta read from the Swiss stage games, but you guys have never played an official on the new patch or any game on the big stage. And in the lower bracket, you just ran into very good veteran teams that play a slow and disciplined style you have literally never faced in your regions before. So honestly, GG, take the experience, do some VOD reviews, improve your team around your promising duelists and go next. There are probably more fundamental things to talk about with Sentinels, but if I have to choose one takeaway, it's just too outrageous not to choose that one. Why would you pick Waylay in your Sent game against Fnatic with your tournament live on the line? This agent is shit, everyone knows it, always been the case. And yeah, some teams tried it out in the regular season and that's okay. Someone that got to give it a try and she's very fun to pop off on. Sure, you can play her against Furia with nothing on the line. But even MIBR, who had a horrendous tournament, and G2, spoiler here, who had a terrible meta read, stopped picking Waylay in Toronto. Team Liquid played her, but they get at least some value and had a complicated circumstances for their preparation, so I guess they get a pass. Second, however, is a great Chatter Neon and a good Yoru player, and every pro knows how to run a normal Chatter Sent comp. I even think Sentinel's Vice adaptation was great on this map. But there was no reason to pick Waylay and throw your tournament away like that. The Waylay looked absolutely dreadful and got second killed more often than she got any value. Like, what am I even watching here? This takeaway only affects one map, but it gotta be the throw of the tournament. Please, for every Sentinels fan's sakes, don't do anything like that again. Toronto started out great for Gen.G. They were breezing through the Swiss stage, even handing PaperX the only loss of the tournament. Texture could do no wrong. They beat the other finalists in their first playoffs game and looked like the clear title favourites. Only a win against some funny Premier League team away from the upper final. And that's where it all collapsed. 2 incredible chokes. Going from an 11-8 lead to losing 11-13, and from leading 9-5 to losing 9-13. They did win the second map in the lower bracket game against G2, but then choked an 11-4 lead into an 11-13 loss. An all-time collapse, the worst we have ever seen. Like, what more is there even to say about this tournament run? 3 maps in 2 games, lost to extreme comebacks, and they didn't manage to bounce back for even a single round in any of these maps once the comeback started. Get a performance coach or sports psychiatrist or something. G2 made it to the top 4 and only lost to the 2 finalists, which is quite good, but it still feels kind of disappointing after being the heavy favorites in this tournament. I don't think they should panic or make any roster changes, but focus on their meta read instead. Many of their team compositions look quite poor to me. They only played Vice on Haven, even though she had an 87% unmirrored win rate, making Vice's Toronto probably the best tournament any agent ever had in VCT history. Especially on Lotus, where a lot of teams found a lot of value with Vice, G2 decided to play Teo instead, which nobody really found any value with, and they seemed almost a little bit confused on how to deal with Vice and playing against her. Both double Duelist and double Sentinel compositions worked wonders for the other top teams in Toronto, but G2 didn't really venture into either of that, even though Leaf had an individually great tournament and could have probably found more value in Duelist or Chamber, while also taking some of the burden off Georgiamo, who was often asked to do so much playmaking and round deciding early fighting on a team whose two best gunfighters are pretty clearly Leaf and Trent. I feel like putting Trent on solo initiator, Jonah on Vice and Leaf on Chamber or a second Duelist is something they should have really at least tried once this tournament, especially since they used to run this in Pearl and Kickoff in Bangkok and should therefore already be kind of comfortable in comps like this. Wow, what an incredible run from Wolves and so much to feel good about for them. My pragmatic main takeaway for them, however, is that even if that run was just very momentum based and they cannot replicate it at champs, they still discovered some absolute gems here. Spring had an incredible tournament with unparalleled impact on controllers. It's 100 times easier to find a good aimer and put him in chat than someone who can play Astra, Omen and Viper and have the second highest rating in an international where he played a significant amount of games. And I still don't even think he was the biggest standout for Wolves in Toronto because, oh my god, what an unforgettable tournament from Sufat Baby. He was an incomparable hype man for his team, keeping up the vibes while also calling the most nuanced and mid-round heavy style we have ever seen from any Chinese team. And if that wasn't enough, he also had very respectable individual stats and was surprisingly reliable in the clutch. Those are the kind of players every team needs to succeed. And I think finishing third in international for Duelist who performed pretty average in every way speaks volumes of the rest of the team. And I don't say that to critique Juicy, hanging with the best in the world in your first international is very respectable, but to credit the rest of the team, and it would be very surprised if none of them end up winning a tournament in the next few years. Coming second, especially if it is so close, always hurts, no doubt about it. However, the main takeaway here should be that this new iteration of Fnatic is getting better at a rapid pace. They struggled during kickoff, looked good during stage 1, and now made it as close to being the best team in the world as you can possibly without actually winning. Crashy, but he's obviously not Prime Leo, is about as good of a fit in this team as you could have realistically hoped for. Kayak is really finding his footing and becoming both one of the best and most consistent duelists in the world. And Alfie and Chronicle are arguably still two of the very best players in the world and both had a top 10 rating in this tournament. And Boaster did not frag out, but he had a lot of assists and very few first deaths, which makes his overall performance quite okay for the GL. His calling style admittedly did look a little bit stupid at times when they lost the tech rounds to the time, but I think he did outcall G2 and was more successful than any other Western IGL at getting the top Asian teams to make mistakes and capitalize on them. I think with some more time to develop and another chance in Paris, this Fnatic roster seems like one of the biggest favorites to win champs. PaperX finally did it, giving Coach Alex a calmer presence at his side who he could bounce ideas off and who knows the team inside out, and Mindfreak was a great change. And so was giving the players a consistent, patient and more passive player like Patman, who doesn't die first, throws good util, and is cold on the clutch, and also lurked on Icebox like he was Prime Nats. The Vi was also very reliable and utilized a very overpowered Vice, probably more and better than anybody else in the tournament. And the calm and solid foundation of those two allowed the absolute unparalleled plethora of playmaking, creativity and mechanics from Forsaken, Something and Ching to fully shine without trolling too regularly. In addition, the map pool felt pretty good for PaperX, but they also earned themselves the double ban in the finals by, winning, and just somehow turned Pearl into a map where attacking with Raze on a judge works on the highest level. And yes, they probably won this time because they showed more variability in their tempo and more discipline than ever, but they also managed to sacrifice their trolling instead of their creativity for it. So let's end this video with the greatest set play I've ever seen. And the fact that they waited to pull this out until the grand finals in round 24 of the map makes you really wonder what else they have in store.